This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And for those of you who may be listening for the first time, it's about a journey. We're all on a journey. I don't know about you, but when I was a little girl, I knew exactly where I was going. I saw that yellow brick road right in front of me, and I was just going to march down it, and my life was going to be absolutely perfect. But one of the things I learned probably in my teenage years is nothing is perfect and not everything is fair. But if you look around and you are intentional about who you want to be and where you want to go, you can have a phenomenal life. That doesn't mean everything's perfect. Today, my guest is Rick Ornelas. Did I get it right, Rick?
Yes, you did.
Wow, I'm terrible with names. And I met Rick on podmatch.com. And when I read his bio, I was thinking, here's a man who obviously was on a totally different path up until recently. And then something changed, and Rick is on a new road and a very successful road. So Rick, welcome to the show, and give us a little idea of who did you think you wanted to be when you were that young kid?
Well, first off, thank you for having me on the show, Karen. It's a pleasure to be on Avoid the Maze, and I appreciate that you did find me on Podmatch.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, when I was little, I think I went through different waves. When I'm real small, I think it was always, at least for my generation, it was kind of, oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to help people and be a doctor. And then as I got a little older, I wanted to be a pilot for a long time. My father worked for an airline. He wasn't a pilot, but he worked for an airline as a financial officer. And so we got to travel a little bit when I was young. We got to go on a few trips here and there. And I always just loved the flying. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to be a pilot. And then I wanted to go, I didn't want to just go to flight school. I didn't want to go into the military either. So when I went to college and I started taking classes for like aerospace engineering and some things to just kind of round that out. And that didn't go so well. I had to withdraw, drop out of those classes. And then I said, well, maybe I'll save the pilot thing for a later time in life.
You know, that's interesting because a lot of us get that realization when we go to college. I know when I was going to college, my parents wanted me to be a teacher. I had no desire. Communications is what I wanted to do. And I found my way around taking the courses that were difficult for me because I saw they had an associate's program right in what I wanted to major in. So I took that. And I was so excited about it. But then I found out to get my bachelor's, I still had to take that foreign language and the history and the things that just were tedious for me. And that's when it was like, you know what, I'm stopping here because the realization was I wasn't ready. And so I can understand, you know, you wanted to be a pilot, those classes would have definitely helped. But if they weren't clicking, it doesn't help at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously you didn't become a pilot. What did you become?
Well, when I got out of, I wanted to get out. One thing I did know, okay, I knew I wanted to go to college. I had that dream. I mean, I always knew I was going to go to school. Education was a big part of my upbringing. But I wanted to finish so fast. I was always in such a hurry, and I had a scholarship. And so I said, okay, I need to finish in 4 years. So I finished in 4 years. I had to make up for that class that I had dropped, the aerospace engineering class and everything. And I got out and I was like, okay, now what? And I finished with a degree in social sciences, communications. And I was thinking, okay, now what am I going to do? And I ended up doing a few interviews, on-campus interviews, different things. I ended up taking the first job that sounded good. It sounded like I had a future. It was for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. It was working as, they had a management training program. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go through this. And where I eventually, I worked there for a few years, and where I eventually ended up was just kind of migrating into sales in healthcare. And because that seemed like a natural fit, that I was good at building relationships and good at having conversations, communicating. And that's where I ended up for many years, kind of in that comfortable place. It wasn't super challenging, wasn't anything that pushed me too much, but it was comfortable. And so I stayed there for a long time.
And that's what a lot of us do. I mean, number one, we have to put a roof over our head, food on the table. There are other things that we all dream about having in life. And if you don't have that paycheck, you're not going to have them. At least that's what we think. And I know I was in that situation for a very long time. I found jobs that I really enjoyed, that I could stay at for long periods of time. And could I have moved on? Absolutely, now that I look back, but I was comfortable. And it's like, sometimes comfortable is a good thing, and sometimes it's not, because it can take away that drive that we have inside. So when you went from healthcare sales, what made you decide that, hey, now's the time to get out, do something different?
Well, it wasn't really, it ended up that I wasn't forced into it, but it just kind of got thrust upon me. So I had some friends that had started a small healthcare startup. And these were three business guys. They didn't have an experience in healthcare. They had experience in business. They had been successful in business, but they didn't have experience in healthcare. And at the time, I was in like corporate training and development for a major, Fortune 100 company, big international company, and was doing very well and had no desire to go anywhere because, again, comfortable, making a good living, had a good kind of career path ahead. And they said, we could really use your help. So I started kind of helping them on the side. I started helping them in the side, just, I asked for a crazy amount of compensation for the work I was doing and help them on the side. And I was traveling for my regular job. So I would work, in hotel rooms at night. I'd be working on all this.
Sure.
And I did that for about 6 months. And it became just so much that I couldn't really juggle both of them. I mean, it was, in hindsight, I probably wasn't as good at my time management, but with the travel and everything, it was a challenge. And so I realized that I had to make a decision, and they kind of gave me the keys to the castle, if you will, and said, hey, we need your help. And, maybe an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I said, all right. And I jumped with both feet. And then that really changed the trajectory of, my career and my future, for sure.
And a lot of us are totally terrified to do that, especially if it's not a big corporation making that offer. And even big corporations, there's no guarantee that we'd be there, next week. And I've seen that happen. In fact, it happened with my husband. But we have more of a belief that a big company, we could be there for a while. But now you are working with, 3 individuals, building a company. And even with a great compensation package, that had to have been scary for you. What if tomorrow they change their mind?
Yeah, it was, because so one little piece of the puzzle was, prior to getting that position with that big healthcare Fortune 100 company, I had relocated my family from California to Texas, to take a startup position. It was a very well venture capital backed, healthcare company, but it was still a startup. And I had uprooted my family and moved them over here for that position. And a year and a half later, that company completely folded, completely went under. No severance, no anything. It was the 3rd of July. They said, hey, your last day is July 5th. And I'm like, oh,
Wow.
thanks for the 4th of July present,
Yeah.
And then I got that other position and had worked there for 4 years before I went to this other startup. But I had experienced that, so I had that memory, and I thought, hey, this is going to be different. This is going to be a better situation. And it was a roller coaster. I mean, it was scary. You're right, Karen. It was definitely scary. There was a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of good decisions and bad decisions, and tremendous growth, and then things don't go so well, and then you make a bad decision and it affects the company, and we're doing all sorts of, I mean, I had so much responsibility and was making so many moves, and I mean, we grew this company, multi-millions of dollars in a very short period of time, and hired dozens of people, and all this stuff. And then we started getting focused on the wrong things, and then things started to kind of crumble, beneath us after, again, a very short time. I mean, less than 2 years.
And your story is really not unusual. A lot of people have been in your shoes. And that's why I'm so glad that you're sharing it, because we always think it only happened to me. Okay. Nobody else has ever experienced this. And one wrong move in any business can be the beginning of the collapse. Maybe if you catch it fast enough, you might be able to revert it. But oftentimes we are looking so forward into the future that we don't see what is really happening around us right now. And sometimes you don't have the time to, because your job is to be thinking about the future. So when everything started to crumble, now what? You have your family, you're in Texas, you've been through spirals over the last couple of years. Here's another one, but this one looks like a really big one.
Yes, it was, and it was right before Christmas too. And I decided that I was so stressed. I had become so stressed, and I'm not a stressful person. I mean, not by any means. And I hadn't really there had only been very few times, maybe a couple in my life where I had been in a stressful time period. And I realized that I had been so stressed and was doing way too much. And I decided to walk away. We parted ways, and I said, all right, and without knowing what I was going to do next, with just taking that leap into the unknown. And it was one of the most freeing experiences I've ever had in my life. When people talk about, hey, getting that weight off your shoulders, I mean, I literally felt that. It sounds so cliche, but I remember I had traveled to Louisiana where the company was located. And I remember walking out of there and driving back to the airport and everything, and talking to my wife and saying, I just feel completely freed. Like this big weight is gone. This big burden that I had been carrying is gone. And then I went through a period of, just a few weeks where I had people that were contacting me about helping them, working with them, doing different things. And I said, hey, I don't really want to go work for someone else. I had always had that dream of being my own boss and starting my own consulting company. So I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start my own coaching and consulting company. People were interested. And so I said, hey, rather than work for them, I'll start my own company, and then they can hire me and do it that way. And that's exactly what I did.
And, that was a phenomenal way of looking at it, because you had people who were interested in your skills. Okay. Now you could go back to them and say, all right, this is what I can do for you as a consultant. This is how I can use my skills best for you, rather than sitting in your office 8-9 hours a day, just working for you. And interestingly enough, my husband and I went through this right after our youngest son was born. He was working for you may remember they used to be a small software company by the name of Microsoft, which is now huge. He worked with them in their infancy, and he loved the job. Everything was perfect, but we lived in Ohio. Okay, they wanted him to either move to Seattle, which we could not afford, or North Carolina, where their call center was, and he didn't want to be sitting in a call center, and we both looked at each other, and he said, I have to walk away from this company. And I said, okay, well, there's other companies. Whoever thought they were going to get as huge as they are. But it was the best thing that he also did, because he taught himself to become a programmer. He taught himself consulting. And for 10 years, he ran his own company. So I understand that, sometimes you have to walk away from what looks like comfort to create something that makes you feel good. And that's
Yeah.
obviously what you did. So,
yeah, exactly.
So you obviously had the skills, but did you actually know how to go sell the skills as well? Because not only you're not selling a product, you're selling yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And it was different because I had been in sales for years prior to that, and I had always had success in sales. But you're exactly right. And I honestly, I don't even think I've ever really thought about it that way, but it was completely different. And it took some time. I had the fortunate and unfortunate experience of my first client. I got a very high paying first client right off the bat. So I started off and think, oh, this is easy, right? This is easy. And then after working with him for about 9 months, and they weren't making the changes that I was requesting, and things weren't going well. And it was again, I was entering into that stressful environment, and too controlling and too stressful. And I said, okay, I'm walking away from that too. And then I hit a very challenging time of trying to find business. And I think that's exactly what it was. It was being, hey, I know how to sell, but here I was trying to sell, the value of what I was bringing instead. And so it was different. And I did go through challenging kind of ups and downs for, over a year before really figuring that out and being able to communicate that better.
Well, and also it sounds like you learned from your mistakes, which many of us tend not to want to believe that we ever made mistakes. It's everybody else's fault. Probably was that first client because they weren't listening to you, because it's much easier to blame everybody other than ourselves. One of the things that I've learned, and especially since I've been doing these podcasts, is I need to go back and look at my mistakes, even on a daily basis. What did I do well yesterday? But also, what didn't I do well yesterday? Don't have to beat myself up over it, but if I can learn from it, it's sure going to make tomorrow a lot better for me. And I think that's probably what has happened with you, that, you know what, I could have this great paying client, but if I'm not focused on where it really needs to go, I'm going to get back into that stressful time that is not good for me, not good for my client or anybody else around me.
Yeah, exactly, Karen. And I think, looking back at mistakes, and that's something I've had to learn over the years, because I think mistakes and failure, they're the best teacher that we have in life. I mean, by far the best teacher. And when I do take the time to look back and come to realizations and figure out, okay, what did I learn here? Where did I go wrong? What should I do differently? Then it makes things so much easier.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it took me, I would say, the majority of my life so far to realize that it's okay to make a mistake. I grew up in an era where my father and mother were always telling me, don't make a mistake, follow the rules, do everything along the way. And I was always afraid to admit to them I made a mistake. Again, I was the blamer. It was my teacher, it was my boss, it was always somebody else. But about 10 years ago, when I realized, wait a second, it couldn't have been everybody else's fault all these years. I need to take a deep look into myself. So how did your book come along? When did you decide that, hey, I'm going to write 12 Hours of Heaven, Lessons for a Better World? Wow.
It was the story for the book goes way back, and I'll answer your question, and then we can go back to where that came from. But it goes back to something that happened 20 years ago, or now 21 years ago. But I had the idea then, after this major accident. I had the idea, and I didn't do anything with it because I was in that comfortable place that I was talking about earlier. I was in that comfortable place. I didn't really need to add that to my life, and I was just kind of moving along, like I said, just doing all right. But then the pandemic hit, and everything got thrown for a loop, like it did for a lot of people across the world. And it's back in March of 2020 when we go into lockdown, where I live, and well, pretty much all over the place, and work changes. And at that time, my coaching consulting business I was doing well. What happened was some of my clients said, hey, let's put your services on hold. Can we put our services on hold? Our business has decreased, or we had to close. And so let's put your services on hold. And then one of my clients, I was the acting chief operating officer for one of my clients. And they said, hey, we're going to need to lay you off because of business and everything. So I was like, okay. So I saw my income went to, almost nothing in a very short period of time. Right. So I got anxious and worried about what the future held. And I was in a very uncomfortable place. I'm someone that does like knowing what's ahead and having that illusion of control, but I was in a very uncomfortable place. And I went there for a short time of a few weeks. And then I realized that I had been given a wonderful opportunity of time. I had time with my family. I had time to help others. There was far more people that were worse off than I was. And I decided to write about it. So I wrote a blog about using the quarantine as a time of opportunity. And then I had in the back of my head my book that I had been putting off for 20 years. And I said, you know what, there's no better time than now to write this book, because you have all this time on your hands. So I started to write, and I went through this incredible writing journey over the span of about 3 months of bringing 12 hours of heaven to life. But it never would have, well, I don't know if never, but I don't want to say that, but I wouldn't have been spurred to write it when I did if it wasn't for the pandemic and the blessing of time that I was given.
Well, I find this fascinating because there are two sides to the pandemic. There are those like yourself who said, I'm going to use my time wisely. I have the opportunity now. Okay. So I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do, whether it's write a book, start performing music on YouTube or Facebook Live. For some of the musicians who had been wanting to write music, but had been on the road all the time, now they were taking to their studios and writing music. And then there was the other group of people who said, oh, woe is me. And they hunkered down at home, thought about all the things they want to do, and they still haven't done them. And that became sort of a little argument in our home when we got hit with the pandemic. I had surgery 1 week before lockdown here in Ohio. And I was told I was going to have 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, and I knew I could still podcast. I knew I could still do um, the website designs that I'm doing. So I thought, okay, no big deal, 6 to 8 weeks, and everything's going to be back to normal. Little did we know back then. And in the meantime, my husband, he wasn't getting assignments. He's an IT consultant, so he was the only one who left the house to do the grocery shopping and things. We had it all planned out. This is perfect. And when the 8 weeks was over and I could get out and there really was no place to go, I just got more creative with it, what I was doing. My husband, on the other hand, wanted to be the breadwinner as he had been. And it was really destroying him that there's no work for me, even though I love my photography and I have probably 100,000 pictures that I could go through and possibly fix and sell. He talked about it, just never did it. And so we joke about this a lot, that either it's ingrained in you to say, hey, I'm going to make the most out of today, or I'm going to dream about what the most could be. And so for you, I think it's phenomenal that you saw this as your opportunity. Had to have been hard with your income dropping, because I know it was hard for my husband. But yet you had that fuel inside of you. And it sounds like you've always been like that. You always take the opportunity.
Yeah, I'd say it's something I've learned over the years. I mean, that goes back to my upbringing. I mean, my father really ingrained that into my head from a very young age, is that, I'm to rely on your faith and rely on yourself, your own abilities, and to make stuff happen. And you don't really need to ask for help. And, you can kind of accomplish things. And so I've always had that drive, that internal drive. I would say that the biggest barrier for me would be that comfortability that I was talking about, just doing enough. So for example, I did very well in school, had a high GPA, graduated, the top of my class, for example, in high school and everything. But if I had the mentality that I have now, I probably would have been the top of my class. Or if I had the mentality that I have now, I would have, had a 4.0 or, whatever the scale is nowadays. But, and even I remember when I was in sales, winning awards and doing well. And I remember that startup company that I had relocated to Texas with, I finished second for the year out of all the territories or, geographies that we had. I finished second. And my boss, he's like, I can't believe that you were second. He's like, you could have been first by a long shot, by miles, and that, you're not living up to your potential, is essentially the message that he was telling me. And it was the second time in my career that when I was doing successful, that my boss had given me a different boss had given me the same message, that you're not living up to your potential. And so, as I said, it's something I've had to learn, or maybe it had to be beaten into my head over the years, is that, maybe my idea of what what the potential is not what the true potential is, and that's limitless, that there is no limitations there. And so I had to grow into that over time. And if I had the mindset of, where I was at 30, then I probably would have been the same as your husband. I probably would have talked about it and maybe done some, some cool things, like we redid the backyard and stuff. Oh, I did that. Oh, I accomplished something during the pandemic, but not the big things that, that I ended up doing. And I would have looked back and said, oh yeah, that was good. I did something good with my time. I didn't waste it or anything like that. So it is a different mindset. And it is a
Sure.
mental shift, because it's really one that has limitations and one that doesn't. Yeah.
Well, and I think we're living through an era now that, yes, companies still need to have employees, but there is a great opportunity for many of us to work independently, like yourself, for other companies. And in some ways, large companies like that, because they don't have to pay all the frills, they just pay you for your time. And it can be a juggling act. And I know exactly what that's like, with the different clients that I have. And there are days that, a client will say, hey, business is slow and I'm going to have to, not use your services for X amount of months. And I sit there and I look at, my spreadsheet and I go, what does that mean to me? But what I've had to decide is what makes me feel good at the end of the day. And if it makes me feel good, then I am good for myself, my family, and even new clients. And it's usually at that point when somebody contacts me and says, oh, by the way, are you available? And it's like, where did this come from? And it's about, being aware, being centered. And it's not an easy task. And I'm sure that, those who are listening who are saying, oh, well, Rick must have had a boatload of money and, Karen had money put aside. And my answer is no, I was pushed out of corporate America 10 years ago with not an extra dollar to my name. And I was the breadwinner at the time. So that was very difficult, for us, because it was like, I loved what I was doing, but they didn't need me anymore. I had to reinvent myself. But that's when I dug deep and said, okay, how can I wake up every day and be happy with what I'm doing? So you've taken.
That's so important. That's so important. Sorry, I was just
no,
want to say,
absolutely.
that's just that is so important. And I think so many people, and when you're commenting about how people that are listening, they might be having certain judgments or certain perceptions of, myself or yourself. And I think everybody really needs to ask themselves that question that you asked yourself, is to ask themselves, am I truly happy every day? Am I going to look back? Statistics show that when people are asked this question at the end of their life, 3/4 of people, 76% of people that are asked, what do you have anything that you would change in your life? 76% of people have regret. They have regret, saying that, oh, I wish I had taken more chances. I wish I had tried to live that dream that I had when I was 25, or gone and done that thing that I wanted to do 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And I think that's another way that people can look at it, because then it's that perspective shift of saying, okay, in 50 years or 70 years or 20 years, am I going to look back and say, all right, I was happy, I was fulfilled, I had an impact on others? Or are they going to look back and be what part of that 76%? I mean, I don't want to be part of that 76%. I mean, for sure, no way. I've told myself that a long time ago, that I want to look back and say, all right, I did everything I could, and experienced everything to the fullest, and squeezed every last drop out of life. And if they're really honest with themselves, then hopefully people will be able to answer that question for themselves and have their own realizations.
Absolutely. So you now have a podcast, correct? That you
My
do?
podcast is launching in about a month. So I have a podcast. Yeah. I Spark Change podcast. It'll be launching in about a month.
So can you give us an idea of what we might be hearing on this podcast?
Yeah, sure. You're actually the first person to ask about it, Karen. So thank you. Well, when I I'm going to give you a little deeper answer, because
Okay.
when I was writing my book, I went through this, as I said, this really spiritual journey, this experience that lasted for about 6 weeks or so, where I was really connected to a higher power, felt God was just giving me my story, and felt that I was being called to do more than write a book. And with that came the idea for I Spark Change, which is the organization that I created in 2020 and have been working on since then, to empower others to elevate their social impact and spread positive change around the world. And when I had the idea for I Spark Change, I was thinking, okay, how am I going to do this? I need to build this community. I need to grow. I need to, get these messages out and help other people. And so it's taken on a lot of facets over the past year and a half. And one area that had, from the beginning, I was like, I really need to have a podcast, because it'll be a great way to share the message about I Spark Change, and more importantly, spread the work of others that are doing positive change, spreading positive change and doing positive work in the world, to really spotlight them and show what they're doing, and make sure that other people know about their work, because there's billions or billions of people that are doing work that nobody knows about, that are doing something that nobody sees, if they don't happen to stumble across it on the internet or social media. And so that's what the goal of I Spark Change eventually is, to impact 1 billion people, to connect and impact 1 billion people, where they can see everything that others are doing. And podcasting was always a part. And so in about a month, when we launched I Spark Change podcast, the theme is positive change. And the guests that I want to have, will have on the podcast, are people, groups, organizations, companies. It doesn't really matter, any type of the above, that are doing positive work in the world, that are impacting others in a positive way, that are doing something to spread that positive change and have a social impact, on humanity, to essentially make the world a better place. And I think there's just so many people that I can have on the show as guests, to share their story, and that I can amplify it and spread it, in our community and on our social media, and share the work that they're doing to help them grow. Because the way I see it is that every action, every positive action, has a ripple effect that goes far, far beyond the initial work or the initial action. And that's what I want to do. I want their work to have a greater ripple effect, and my work to have a greater ripple effect. And we end up improving the world by everybody spreading that positive change.
Well, that was one of the things that I was hoping you would talk about when I read your bio, because that's what Avoid the Maze is about. It's about reconnecting, networking, one person changing at a time. There, like you said, there are so many people out there who are doing things that are positive. We don't always know about them, because some of them are very quiet about what they do. Mm-hmm. Some are more vocal. Some people are just afraid that, hey, nobody's going to listen to me, so why should I do anything? When I left corporate America and decided that I wanted to do podcasting, and I wanted to do web design and work with people with those positive messages, somebody said to me, how are you going to live off of that? And I said, right now, that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, if it helps me, it's going to help somebody else. And our stories are similar. It's not the same road that we took together, but we both took roads that led us to wanting to make this a better place to live in. And in the last couple of years, I think many of us, our eyes have opened up thinking, well, I thought this was a great place, But guess what? There's a lot of things going on around us that I didn't see. And now I'm opening up my eyes and I'm seeing. And I don't have to agree with everybody, but I can learn from others. And I had a conversation yesterday in a podcast, and totally did not agree initially with my guest. I listened, and probably 10 minutes into it, I sort of stopped her and I said, I have to let you know, when you first started out, my back got rigid. I felt like I was closing off, but I heard what you said, and it makes a lot of sense. I said, I'm so glad I listened. I said, because fundamentally we're coming from opposite sides, but realistically, I met you in the middle. And I felt so good about myself because I didn't close off. And that's how we make this a better world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 100%, Karen. And in the past couple of years, I've had hundreds of interviews and Zoom calls and connected with people from all over the world. And one common thread across probably all of them is that everyone can, regardless of what our beliefs are, what our background is, what our ethnicity or religion or any of that, the commonality is that we all want to have a better world. We all want to make the world a better place. We all want to have a place that we can live and be who we are and create a wonderful world for our children and for the future. And essentially everyone I've spoken to, they all want that. And I think deep down, probably the majority of humanity would agree that, yeah, that's a good thing, that would be what everybody wants, regardless of, like I said, what country they're from or what culture or anything. And so just by having that attitude of, doing unto others and treating others the way you would want to be treated, we essentially can start to create that better world and build that ripple effect. Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, oh, you or me. No, it's just us. We're just all part of humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how can our listeners find you?
Well, the best place, and thank you for asking, Karen, the best place is at isparkchange.com. It's just the letter I, sparkchange.com. Also on any social media platform, we are iSparkChange on Instagram. We have a very active social media, very active Instagram. We have a Facebook group, also iSparkChange on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. I have a great team that helps with that. And we'd love for people to join our iSparkChange. They can join our community on our webpage, and then they'll receive a monthly newsletter that has people that are impacting the world. It shares stories of people that are impacting the world in a positive way from all over the place. Social impact heroes and social impact leaders, as we call them, on our website and our newsletter, and they can see videos with stories of other people that are doing positive work, and then the work that we're doing as well through iSparkChange and what we have going on. They can follow that on social media. And then the last place is, if anyone that's listening has been inspired or intrigued by 12 Hours of Heaven, then they can find that on Amazon or Google or any platform. They'll find it if they search the title.
That is terrific. Well, I want you to know there is a gentleman in Houston. You may have heard of him. His name is Saul Paul. And if you haven't heard of him, I'm going to send you, I'm going to connect the two of you. He is a musician, a speaker. He's the all round. And it's all about being there for others. And I met Saul Paul a couple of years ago online, and I'm just enamored with all the good that he does. So since he's in your backyard, that may be another good connection for I Spark Change.
Yeah, awesome. That I love that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Anyone. I mean, he'll be great. And then anyone like that. I mean, we always love to connect with, even like connecting with you through Podmatch, but connecting with people that are doing some positive work in the world. So absolutely.
Well, we will continue to follow you. We'll have you back on in the future. And I can't wait for the podcast to start. So I'll be listening. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.